I woke up this morning with my mind.
It was
Set on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind, Lord. Set on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind. Set on freedom. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. I'm walking and talking in the night. Set on freedom. I'm walking and talking with my mind, Lord. Set on freedom. I'm walking and talking with my mind. Set on freedom. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Walk, 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 you gotta talk, 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 it ain't no harm to keep your mind set on freedom. It ain't no harm to keep your mind, Lord, set on freedom. It ain't no harm to keep your mind set on freedom. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of the Brazos Valley, UUCBV, or Brazos UU for short. My name is Carolyn Clark, and it's my privilege to be your worship assistant today. I come to this church because I find here a community that shares my values and calls me to live those values more deeply. We are a welcoming congregation, which means we celebrate and welcome all people of diverse sexual orientations and gender identities. We also strive to welcome people across diversities of race, age, ability, immigration status, and belief. So whoever you are, wherever you have come from, wherever you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. We are also a reproductive justice congregation, which means that we support the reproductive decisions of all people. We encourage everyone to visit our website, brazos-uu.org. During this time of pandemic and in the midst of our planned building project, the website and our weekly services are our church home. If you might like to contribute your musical talents, if you have a great story to share your life's journey, or if you have a passion for social justice, we would love to hear from you. If you are interested in getting involved, you can find opportunities on our website. To learn more about our community and what is happening, you can join our email list and our monthly newsletter. And you can also find us on social media by searching UUCBV.
My name is Martin Webb, Texas prison number 541397, convicted of capital murder and survived a death penalty trial. I was sentenced to life after the jury failed to answer whether or not I'd be a continuing threat to society for the November 1988 murder robbery of the Sugarman 6 theater manager Don Craven. Surprisingly, after enduring the criminal justice system in the above-mentioned capacity, I support the death penalty. There have been and are those in our society that do not value human life. If not removed from society, they will kill again and again. If incarcerated, they have and will kill in this community. Of course, the death penalty, as we know it, needs a complete overhaul, in my humble opinion and experience. Currently, the state has a total advantage over any person charged with any crime, especially capital murder. Consider that the district attorney has an army of supporting staff from assistant district attorneys to district attorney investigators, to the police force, to the local city and county government, as well as state and federal government at their disposal. While the person charged has whatever meager defense team they can afford, or actually manage to go into deep debt to obtain, and more times than not, it's a court-appointed defense team which is paid for by the very government prosecuting the person accused. But my investigator was paid $1,500 to $2,500. I don't know exactly which. These numbers should be available through Brazos County records. So financially, which translates to quality, there was a huge disadvantage for me and those like me, considering the state's vast resources. And this surpasses simple finances. It translates into life experiences, human bodies, manpower, equipment, technology. The list of advantages is nearly endless. This is evident when a poor or middle-class person of color or white is faced with defending themselves in the criminal justice system in general, but most specifically a capital murder trial, as compared to some celebrity, say O.J. Simpson or Bing Crosby or Robert Durst. This list is also endless. A fact that most death penalty opponents or supporters don't know is that it is totally up to the district attorney to determine who is going to be prosecuted and for what, to obtain witnesses and evidence against whoever they have decided to prosecute, which is usually the party or suspect who refuses to work with the district attorney, refuses to accept a plea bargain, and demands a trial for those admitting their small involvement in the crime as compared to the person facing the capital murder charge. If given the death sentence, there are no external opportunities for rehabilitation, as the person is confined to their cell 23 hours a day for the most part. If given a life sentence under current classification plans, the person is remained a G3 for at least 10 years, and while not as restrictive as a death row prisoner, external rehabilitation is only little more available. Under old classification rules and policies, prisoners sentenced to life had the least restricted confines and availability to more external rehabilitation opportunities. While there may be more minorities tried for and sentenced to either life or death, I do not consider the death penalty a racial issue or punishment. I see it as a social economic issue that affects poor folks more than it does wealthy or rich folks, educated folks as opposed to uneducated. At least this has been my experience with the death penalty after almost 33 years of incarceration. I'm open to further correspondence. I believe by leveling the financial playing field, we could price out most death penalty punishment, and in doing so, make the total criminal justice system more fair to everyone involved. Thank you.
I invite you to light your own chalice if you have one, as I light our chalice today. Please say our chalice lighting words with me. We light the chalice, the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith, as a beacon of hope for all who seek justice, dignity, and compassion, and in celebration of the life of truth and meaning we share together.
Every man could be replaced. Every distance is not near. So I remember every face of every man who put me here. I see my light come shining from the west down to the east. Any day now, any day now, I shall be released. They say every man must need protection. They say every man must fall. Yet I swear I see my reflection someplace so high above this wall. I see my light come shining from the west down to the east. Any day now, any day now, I shall be released. Yonder stands a man in the lonely crowd. Man says he is not to blame. All day long I hear him hollering so loud, just crying out he's not to blame. I see my light come shining from the west down to the east. Any day now, any day now, I shall be released. Any day now, any day now, I shall be released.
Our Time for All Ages today is a story of forgiveness by Reverend Dr. Emily Brolt, who is a Unitarian Universalist minister who also works as a chaplain with the Oregon State Correctional Department. Prior to her current position working with incarcerated women, she worked at a juvenile correction facility. That is the setting for our story today. Reverend Dr. Brolt shares, "While I was working at a juvenile correctional facility, I met a 15-year-old boy. We'll call him Jeremy. Jeremy was in prison for breaking into a church and stealing money. It was a random church. He didn't know anybody there, had never gone there, but it was an easy mark and he needed the money. Toward the end of his sentence, Jeremy had the chance to participate in a restorative justice circle. It turned out that some of the people at the church wanted to meet him. They wanted to hear his side of the story. Why did you do it? Why us? And they wanted to tell their side of the story too. How did Jeremy affect the church? How did he affect the people in the church? I was one of the people who helped Jeremy get ready for his circle. At first, Jeremy didn't understand why the people would be mad at him. He said, "It's not like I stole from somebody in particular. The church can always get more money. It's not like it's somebody's money." I tried to explain it to him like this. Imagine that you have two piles of money. One pile is for yourself, for things you want, maybe a bike or a stereo. And the other pile is for your grandpa. Maybe you're saving money for your grandpa because he needs surgery or he needs glasses, and you've been saving money for him for a long time. So now imagine these two piles of money, and I'm going to take one of them from you. Should I take your money? Or should I take the money that you have been saving for your grandpa? Jeremy decided I should take his money. When I asked him why, he said, "Because I can always get those things later, but my grandpa needs help." "Well, Jeremy," I said, "when you stole from the church, you stole money that people gave so they could help other people. So you didn't just steal from one person, you stole from a pile of money that was meant to help many people, maybe people like your grandpa." Jeremy was very nervous about meeting the people he had stolen from, but he wanted the chance to apologize to them. He was very scared about what they would say, though. Would they hate him? Would they yell at him? He had no idea how they would react. But he wanted to apologize, and he had the courage it took to listen to whatever the people of the church needed to say to him. I met with Jeremy the day after the circle. He was so happy and energetic. When I got there, he said, "I was really nervous. All these people were there. The pastor was there, and like 5 different people from the church. And we all just went around the table and talked. They told me how I had hurt them and how they were still struggling with feeling safe in their church. Some of the people cried. I felt so bad. I cried too. I told them everything, what I was thinking, why I did it, and I apologized. I apologized for being selfish and for thinking only of me and for never thinking about how I might affect other people. I wish I could take it back. I wish I could live that night over and make different choices. But I can't. All I can do is say, I'm sorry. And after it was over, some of the people gave me hugs. I don't think I've ever cried so much. I can't believe they gave me a hug, and they forgave me. Jeremy was a different person after that. Something changed in him, something big and important. He talked about his experience in that circle for months. He talked to other guys in the prison. He talked about choices and responsibility. He talked about how our actions affect others even when we don't know it. And he talked about how grateful he felt that he had a chance to say he was sorry and start again. I lost touch with Jeremy after he got out, but he will always impress me. I hope that church was as transformed by the circle as he was. May we all have the courage to face our hurts with gentleness and hope. The end. I'll leave you with a quote today that you can think about throughout the week. Maya Angelou said, quote, "You can't forgive without loving." And I don't mean sentimentality. I don't mean mush. I mean having enough courage to stand up and say, I forgive. I'm finished with it.
Let us pause in life's pleasures and count its many tears, while we all sup sorrow with the poor. There's a song that will linger forever in our ears. Oh, hard times come again no more. 'Tis the song, the sigh of the weary. Hard times come again no more. Many days you have lingered around my cabin door. Oh, hard again no more. While we seek mirth and beauty and music bright and gay, there are frail forms fainting at the door. Though their voices are silent, their pleading looks will say, oh, hard times, come again no more. 'Tis the song, the sigh of the weary. Hard times, come again no more. Many days you have lingered around my cabin door. Oh, hard times, come again no more. 'Tis a sigh that is wafted across the troubled wave. 'Tis a wail that is heard upon the shore. 'Tis a dirge that is murmured around the lowly grave. Oh, hard times, come again no more. 'Tis the song, the sigh of the weary. Hard times, come again no more. Many days you have lingered around my cabin door. Oh, hard times, come again no more. Oh, hard times, come again no more.
Hello, my name is Kristin Houlé Cuellar, and I'm the Executive Director of the Texas Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. We're a grassroots advocacy organization based in Austin with thousands of members throughout the state of Texas, including some very long-time active members in Bryan College Station. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you today about the changing death penalty landscape in Texas and how you can become involved in our efforts to end capital punishment. Earlier this year, our counterparts in Virginia accomplished the seemingly impossible abolition of the death penalty in the first U.S. southern state. And not just any southern state, but the state second only to Texas in terms of executions carried out since the 1970s. Virginia is now the 23rd state to abandon the death penalty through legislative or judicial action. Since 1976, it carried out 113 executions, but like the rest of the country, the death penalty landscape there has shifted considerably. At the time of abolition earlier this year, just 2 people remained on death row, and no one had been sentenced to death since 2011. Whenever another state takes a significant step towards ending the death penalty, it has a tremendous ripple effect throughout the country. It also raises the question of what it will take for Texas to end the death penalty. What we know from Virginia's experience is that reducing use of the death penalty is key to creating a political climate that is receptive to abolition. And this is the strategy we've been pursuing here in Texas, working to prevent new death sentences, stop executions, and damage the death penalty brand while also keeping an eye on our ultimate goal, which is the abolition of capital punishment once and for all. I want to talk with you today about the current death penalty landscape and leave you with 3 words: even in Texas. It may surprise you to hear that Texas is actually moving away from the death penalty, even as it continues to execute more people than any other state in this country. And yet, even in Texas, use of the death penalty has declined significantly over the past 2 decades. One of the key measures of this movement away from the death penalty is new death sentences. So we're talking about new cases that are charged and taken to trial in which prosecutors are seeking the death penalty for someone convicted of the crime of capital murder. Death sentences in Texas have dropped sharply since hitting their peak in 1999 when Texas juries sentenced 48 people to death. For the last 6 years, the number of new death sentences has been in the single digits, including a record low number of jury verdicts in 2020 when 2 people were sentenced to death in trials that took place before the pandemic was declared in mid-March. And to date, this year in 2021, 1 person has been sentenced to death in Bexar County in San Antonio for a crime that occurred in 2016, I believe. The pandemic certainly contributed to the low number of death sentences last year as jury trials ground to a halt. But the reality is that sentences have been dropping for other reasons for the last 2 decades, as I mentioned. The first is that prosecutors are just seeking it far less often. This became true especially after the adoption of life in prison without the possibility of parole as a sentencing option in Texas in 2005. Texas was the last state with the death penalty to provide that as a sentencing option, and it has given prosecutors a great deal more discretion in terms of how they handle capital murder cases. We know that prosecutors are also increasingly concerned about the exorbitant cost of the death penalty. The meter for a case starts running the minute that prosecutors decide to seek the death penalty, and the costs just accumulate after that point. We've seen trials, just the trials that have cost up to $1 million for a variety of reasons, and that cost and just the intensive human resources that these trials require has led a lot of prosecutors around the state to opt not to seek the death penalty. The election of reform-oriented prosecutors in recent years, including in Bexar, Dallas, Fort Bend, Nueces, and Travis counties, also has contributed to the steady decline of the death penalty in Texas. Most of these prosecutors have pledged to limit their use of the death penalty or not seek it altogether in the case of Travis County District Attorney Jose Garza, who was elected last year. DAs are the linchpin of the criminal legal system, and they make all decisions related to charging and what sentences to pursue. So they are absolutely key in our efforts to end use of the death penalty in Texas. Even when they do seek it, however, even when prosecutors do seek it, juries are rejecting arguments for the death penalty in many cases. This happened in half the trials in 2019. So there were 8 cases statewide where prosecutors were seeking the death penalty. 4 of those cases, the jury answered the questions in a way that resulted in a sentence of life without parole. We know that jurors are just demanding higher standards of evidence, and they're also persuaded by mitigating evidence, which is presented in the sentencing phase of a trial in which prosecutors are seeking the death penalty, where the state argues for the death penalty and the defense, if they're represented by competent counsel, will present all the reasons why the jury should spare the defendant's life. And we've seen huge improvements in the quality of representation, of legal representation provided to indigent defendants in Texas over the last 20 years. So we know that prosecutors know that they're going to face a worthy adversary in the courtroom. And we know that jurors are more often than not going to hear that very compelling mitigating evidence that can literally make the difference between life and death. We also know that jurors and prosecutors have grave concerns about the rates of wrongful convictions in this country. 185 people who spent time on death row have been exonerated of those crimes. That includes 16 people in Texas, including well-known cases such as Anthony Graves, who spent nearly 20 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. He was exonerated fully in 2010. As use of the death penalty declines, however, its application remains geographically isolated. Use of the death penalty has never been uniform throughout the state of Texas. In fact, more than half of our 254 counties have never sent anyone to death row. And, historically and currently, it's concentrated in, a handful of jurisdictions statewide. Only 3 counties in Texas have imposed more than one death sentence in the last 5 years. Those are Harris, Tarrant, and Walker counties. It wasn't too long ago that Brazos County actually appeared on this list, but thankfully death sentences have dropped there in recent years. And this is part of just the inherent arbitrariness of the death penalty. Sometimes we refer to this as like death by zip code, such that an individual who commits a crime in one county is going to be and receives a dramatically different punishment than someone who commits a very similar crime under similar circumstances in a neighboring county. Again, it comes down to the elected district attorney of that county in many, many cases. And I think just, again, exemplifies how incredibly arbitrary it is. 2, 4, 7 people in the entire state of Texas are being sentenced to death annually. And this is out of hundreds of crimes that are charged capitally every year. We also know that the death penalty, despite the drop in use, continues to be disproportionately imposed on people of color. This is true historically and currently. Over the last 5 years, 70% of those new death sentences have been imposed on Black or Latino defendants. And these patterns are even more pronounced in those counties that use the death penalty most often. 20 out of the last 21 people sentenced to death in Harris County, for example, are people of color. And this is true in places like Dallas and Tarrant counties as well. So as I said, death sentences are one measure of the use of the death penalty. Another is executions. And, there's a real dichotomy between these two measures, because a death sentence is something that is imposed today under current policies and practices in our current political climate, whereas an execution reflects or involves a case that is often 15, 20, 25 years old and reflects kind of the legacy of the practices and policies in place at that time. So right now there are about 200 or so people still on death row in Texas, and I'm firmly convinced that the vast majority of them would not be there if they were being charged and tried today. About 3/4 of those 200 people have been there for 10 years or longer. And, again, not surprising given the information about disproportionate use of the death penalty. About 45% of the individuals still on death row in Texas today are Black, compared with 12, the fact that they're Black citizens represent about 12 to 13% of our state's population. So while Texas continues to lead the nation by far, carrying out 572 executions since 1982, that number has slowed in recent years. Executions peaked in 2000. 40 people were executed in our state. It's been more of an average of about 10 executions a year in the 5 years before the pandemic. Going back to the death row population for a moment, more than half of the people still on death row come from just 3 counties, Harris, Dallas, and Tarrant counties, which again goes back to this sort of geographic isolation that I spoke to. Currently, there are 3 people on death row who were convicted in Brazos County, and all of them have extremely significant mental health issues that the courts are continuing to address. The state of Texas is one of only 2 states, along with the federal government, to carry out executions during this global pandemic. Texas executed 3 individuals in 2020, which was the fewest executions since 1996. 2 of those were carried out before the pandemic, and the 3rd execution took place over the summer. This unfortunately has continued into 2021. Only Texas and the federal government have carried out executions to date this year. Putting in Texas, 2 people have been put to death. The last 3 people put to death by our state are Billy Joe Wardlow, Quentin Jones, and John Hummel. And the executions of Wardlow and Jones in particular speak to the egregious flaws and failures of the Texas death penalty and the lack of humanity, and just really why, to me, they exemplify why capital punishment is such a travesty of justice. Billy Joe Wardlow was put to death for a crime he committed in 1993 when he was 18 years old. State legislators, juvenile justice experts, neuroscience experts, and even 2 jurors from Billy's trial had called for a reprieve based on what we know now about adolescent brain development. That information had not been available to the jury that sentenced Billy Joe Wardlow to death, and 2 jurors said, really would have made a difference in their sentencing deliberations for this 18-year-old young man who then spent the next 25 years of his life on death row and was truly not the same person who had taken Carl Cole's life in an attempt to rob him of his truck. Similarly, Quinn Jones, put to death by our state on May 19th, 2021. He was 20 years old at the time of the crime and spent more than 20 years on death row. By all accounts, he underwent a transformation during that time. He was an angry young man who had a very difficult childhood when he arrived on death row, and over the next 2 decades, he became a very introspective and truly remorseful person. He had killed his great aunt, Berthena Bryant, while robbing her, and because this was a crime that occurred within his family, he had family members, including his great aunt Maddie Long, who was Ms. Bryant's sister, who forgave Quinn and asked for mercy from the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles and Governor Abbott, which was not granted, despite the voices of thousands of people supporting Maddie Long and others who wanted Quinn to have a second chance. No question that he would ever be released from prison, but that his life had value, and that he could still be a productive member of society even from behind bars. Likewise with Billy Wardlow. And at this time, Texas has 7 more executions scheduled from September through November. One other factor that is contributing to lowered use of the death penalty in Texas is the removal of people from death row, typically after years, if not decades, of litigation. Altogether in 2020, Texas's death row population decreased by 10 people for reasons other than execution. So we have individuals who have died of health reasons in prison, but we also had a number of people whose sentences were reduced to something other than the death penalty. And this is a trend that we've seen increasing in recent years. So over a 5-year period from 2016 through to 2020, a total of 33 people were removed from death row due to either sentence reductions, that was in 26 cases, or deaths in prison. And there were 7 of those. And during the same time period, the state executed 39 people. So that's not quite a 1-to-1 ratio, but all the same, it demonstrates the futility of the death penalty, especially since most of those individuals who were removed from death row spent decades on death row and had pursued legal claims that really should have been pursued or should have been resolved years ago. This is particularly true for an issue involving individuals with intellectual disability claims. The state of Texas was mandated by the U.S. Supreme Court in 2017 to change the way that it assesses intellectual disability in capital cases. It had been using non-medical, non-scientific criteria to make those assessments, and which resulted in a number of people being sentenced to death who constitutionally should have been ineligible for the death penalty. So we're seeing the courts work their way through those cases, resulting in a number of people removed from death row. The person whose case resulted in this change mandated by the U.S. Supreme Court, Bobby Moore, spent 40 years on death row, and finally the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals changed his sentence to life in prison. And because of the time at which he had been sentenced, this was before the adoption of life without parole, he was immediately eligible for parole and rather miraculously was granted parole in 2020 after spending 40 years on death row. So at this time, the death row population in Texas, which is again hovering around 200 people, is at its lowest level since 1985. So we know that public support for the death penalty is eroding here, even in Texas, just as it continues to decline nationwide. But we still have a lot of work to do, particularly to address the legacy of injustice in our state, and we're always looking to build our movement. To that end, I invite you to join us, and there are a number of ways for you to become involved in our efforts. First and foremost, I encourage you to subscribe to our contact list so that you can receive updates about death penalty developments, about the cases that we're working on, the executions that we're working to stop, and other opportunities for advocacy. You also learn about upcoming events, which are still taking place virtually for the most part at this time. I also invite you to share information on social media. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and share our posts. You can help us by spreading the word, talking to your friends and family about this issue, and letting them know that the Texas Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty exists. There are lots of wonderful films, podcasts, and books that can be conversation starters. You'll find lots of information on our website. And then finally, communicating with your elected officials and sharing your concerns about the death penalty is so important. And there are a number of elected officials who play a direct role in the use of the death penalty in Texas. So, as I've mentioned several times, district attorneys, the district attorney is such an important player in whether or determinant in whether our state continues to use the death penalty. County commissioners also are extremely important because they approve the budget for the DA's office. Then, of course, your state representative and state senator can vote on laws that relate to use of the death penalty, and obviously including legislation that would abolish the death penalty. So those are a couple, just few ideas. You certainly will find much more information on our website. So I want to thank you again for giving me this opportunity to talk with you about the death penalty and to share with you how use of the death penalty is declining even in Texas. I look forward to hearing your comments and questions.
If we were having worship service in person, this is the time when we would pass the basket. This church shares the proceeds of the offering plate donation every week to support important nonprofit organizations with which we work. This month, we are proud to support the Confronting Our Racism group, which we will support from July through September. CORG is a coalition of community organizations working to increase our understanding of systemic racism and the ways it impacts individuals in our communities. Please be as generous as you can. If you wish to make an offering, you can mail your check, or for your convenience, you can donate online. On our homepage at brazos-uu.org, you can find our mailing address at the bottom, and you can see a Donate Here link. In the chat box, you will see that link now. May each of us look into our hearts. How much love, how much generosity, how much faith, how much gratitude, how much hope is there? We give thanks for these gifts we have given, for those we receive, and we give thanks for each other.
Gonna keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Keep on moving forward. Never turning back. Never turning back. Sigamos adelante. Siempre adelante. Siempre adelante. Sin volver atrás. Sin volver atrás. Gonna keep on loving boldly. Keep on loving boldly. Keep on loving boldly. Never turning back. Never turning back. Amaremos con pasión. Siempre con pasión. Siempre con pasión, sin volver atrás, sin volver atrás. Gonna reach across our border, reach across our border, reach across our border. Never turning back, never turning back. Vivamos sin fronteras, siempre sin fronteras, siempre sin fronteras, sin volver atrás, sin volver atrás. Gonna reunite the family, reunite the family, reunite the family. Never turning back, never turning back. Familias reunidas, siempre reunidas, siempre reunidas, sin volver atrás, sin volver atrás. Gonna keep on moving forward, keep on moving forward, keep on moving forward, never turning back, 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 never turning back.
We extinguish the chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are gathered together again.